74,000 years ago. The Earth almost gave up on us. A mountain in Sumatra exploded with the power of 2 million Hiroshima bombs, and in a single week, sunlight disappeared, forests vanished, oceans boiled. The air itself turned poisonous. For the first time in history, humanity faced extinction. Only a few thousand survived, scattered, starving, hiding in caves by the sea. But from that darkness, something incredible was born. They didn't just survive, they changed, they became us, because when the world died, they learned how to rebuild it. This is the story of the winter that almost erased humanity, and how from fire and ash, we became who we are today.
Run! It's coming!
Keep moving, don't look back!
The mountain is angry.
74,000 years ago, in the heart of what is now Sumatra, a mountain began to tremble. It started as a deep, hollow sound beneath the earth, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient, waking from its sleep. For centuries, pressure had been building beneath the crust, magma stretching the stone until it could hold no more. And then, in one unimaginable instant, it broke. The ground tore open. The mountain didn't just erupt, it exploded, with the force of millions of nuclear bombs. The top of the volcano vanished, replaced by a column of molten rock and ash that shot 40 kilometers into the sky. Lightning danced through the clouds of debris, as the air itself seemed to ignite. Within hours, ash blanketed everything. Forests caught fire, rivers boiled, and creatures fled blindly through a world that no longer had direction. The roar of Toba was so powerful, it echoed through the atmosphere for days, reverberating across oceans. But the explosion was only the beginning. As the fiery rain settled, a choking darkness began to spread. The skies turned the color of iron. Across Southeast Asia, entire regions were buried under meters of ash. Daylight dimmed. Night lingered for weeks. When the winds carried Toba's fury across the globe, the sun itself began to disappear behind a growing veil of dust. In a matter of days, Earth entered a silence it had never known before. The first breath of a coming volcanic winter. The planet had changed forever. When the eruption finally began to subside, the destruction had already reached continental scale. The skies above Sumatra were unrecognizable, a churning sea of lightning and soot. From India to Australia, ash rained for weeks, burying entire ecosystems beneath a suffocating grey blanket. Forests didn't burn in flames. They vaporized. Rivers that had once carried life now steamed with death, boiling from the relentless fallout of molten debris. Across the coasts of the Indian Ocean, every breath of wind carried fine volcanic glass, sharp enough to scar lungs, deadly enough to silence the songs of birds forever. Within a few days, the sun vanished. A permanent twilight fell over much of the planet. Temperatures began to drop as sunlight struggled to pierce the thick shroud hanging above the world. The eruption had ejected more than 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and rock, enough to cover entire countries beneath dozens of meters of debris. But worse still was what humans could not. Toba's eruption had hurled billions of tons of sulfur, dioxide high, into the stratosphere. There it transformed into a veil of sulfuric acid droplets, spreading invisibly across the globe. These droplets began reflecting sunlight back into space, cooling the Earth at a rate faster than life could adapt. In a few weeks, the planet's climate was rewritten. Winds shifted. Monsoons died. Oceans began to cool from the surface downward. In every direction, the balance of life broke apart. For the first time in human history, the planet itself had turned against its inhabitants. And as the final echoes of Toba faded into the horizon, a new and terrible age began. An age of cold, silence, and extinction. Weeks after Toba's eruption, the Earth looked nothing like the vibrant blue planet it once was. The atmosphere had turned into a swirling veil of dust and acid. From space, the world appeared ashen gray, a bruised planet shrouded in shadow. Temperatures plummeted. Across Asia and Africa, entire ecosystems began collapsing. Plants withered under the dim, dying light. Animals starved as food chains unraveled. Rain turned acidic, poisoning the soil. The very air felt heavy, thick with particles that filtered the sun into a cold, ghostly glow. Scientists call it the Toba bottleneck, a period when humanity was pushed to the edge of extinction. Some believe that the global temperature dropped by as much as 5 to 10 degrees C in a single decade. enough to freeze tropical regions, enough to erase nearly every sign of warmth from the surface of the Earth. For humans, survival became a question of luck and instinct. Small bands huddled in caves, clinging to fire as their only source of life. The sky above them remained dim for 6 years, and in that endless winter, entire populations vanished. It's estimated that only a few thousand humans survived, scattered, isolated, fragile. But even in that darkness, something remarkable happened. The few who endured began to adapt. They learned to share warmth, to store food, to communicate in ways that went beyond mere survival. The world had nearly ended, yet those who remained carried forward the spark of everything that would follow. From the ashes of Toba's fury, humanity began again. The ash settled, the earth went quiet, and slowly, beneath the dim light of a poisoned sky, the age of ice began. What Toba had started, the planet now carried forward. The sulfuric clouds that once glowed red with lightning now drifted into ghostly sheets of gray, reflecting the sun's warmth back into space. Temperatures plunged. Glaciers crept down from the poles like frozen rivers of death, swallowing valleys, mountains, and forests alike. Across Africa and Asia, the cradle of humanity, the land dried into dust. Lakes shrank to cracked basins. Grasslands turned to tundra. Herds of animals that once thundered across the plains began to vanish, one species at a time. And yet, scattered across this frozen wasteland, small groups of humans refused to die. They learned to read the silence of the wind, to hunt what little moved beneath the snow. They wrapped their bodies in hides, built fires in the mouths of caves, and whispered stories of a time when the sun still shone. Fire became more than warmth. It was memory, a reminder that even in a dead world, light could still exist. Archaeologists believe these scattered tribes numbered fewer than 10,000, the last threads of our species. But in those frozen years, something was quietly transforming. Humanity's weakness became its greatest strength. They began to cooperate, to share food, to protect one another's children, to plan for tomorrows they might never see. The Ice Age wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of spirit, and for the first time humanity started to become something greater than survival. The world had become an endless landscape of cold silence, yet beneath that silence, the human mind was awakening. When survival meant outthinking the storm, instinct alone wasn't enough. Every mistake cost lives. Every innovation, no matter how small, meant the difference between extinction and endurance. In the frozen heart of Africa and beyond, the last humans began to invent. They shaped tools of stone and bone sharper and more efficient than ever before. They learned to carve hides into layered clothing, to weave grasses into baskets that could carry water and grain. Some discovered that pressing stone flakes in a certain way created blades thin enough to slice through meat and sinew, the beginnings of advanced craftsmanship. But their greatest creation wasn't made of stone or bone, it was connection. They started to communicate, not just through sounds, but through meaning. Symbols, gestures, shared memories, the birth of something we now call culture. Around fires, they told stories that taught, warned, and remembered. Through those stories, survival stopped being an individual struggle. It became collective memory. While the ice ruled the land, ideas began to rule the mind. And those ideas, passed down, improved, and reshaped, became tools far more powerful than any weapon. As the millennia passed, this fragile species no longer hid from the cold. They used it, turning caves into homes, turning scarcity into creativity. Against every odd, they adapted faster than nature could break them. The Ice Age had not destroyed humanity. It had forged it. After thousands of years of cold and hunger, the ice began to retreat. Slowly, sunlight returned, faint at first, then golden, warm, almost foreign to those who had lived in darkness all their lives. Rivers thawed, forests crept back across the land. For humanity, it was like waking from a long, terrible dream. Those who survived the endless winter emerged with a different kind of strength. Their bodies had grown leaner, their minds sharper. The lessons written in frost had changed them forever. Every hardship had etched something new into their nature. Cooperation, curiosity, resilience. They had learned to see the world not just as something to survive, but as something to shape. The tools they'd built in desperation became the foundations of progress. The shelters that once shielded them from snow evolved into villages. The fires that once flickered in caves became beacons of community, and with warmth came imagination. They painted on stone walls memories of hunts, of spirits, of a world reborn. They began to bury their dead with care, crafting rituals that hinted at something profoundly human, the understanding of meaning. The Ice Age had erased much, but it also revealed what could not be destroyed, the will to create, to hope, to dream. When the glaciers finally retreated for good, the world was no longer ruled by giants or beasts. It belonged to those who had endured when everything else fell silent. And in the quiet dawn after the storm, humanity stood ready to begin again, to build the first sparks of civilization. Every person alive today, every language, every culture, every heartbeat, traces its roots back to them, the survivors. They were few, scattered across the ancient world, like embers left after a wildfire. Some lived along the coasts of Africa, where the ocean still offered food when the land failed. Others clung to mountain caves or river valleys, surviving on roots, insects, and whatever could be hunted in the cold. It's estimated that fewer than 5,000 humans endured the aftermath of the Toba eruption, a number so small that a single drought, a single disease could have erased us forever. Yet somehow they didn't. Perhaps it was the warmth of community. Perhaps it was sheer luck. Or maybe it was the strange, unbreakable defiance written into our DNA, the refusal to surrender when survival seems impossible. They adapted faster than any creature around them. They watched how animals hunted, how plants grew back after fire, how water pooled beneath melting ice. Every discovery became a tool, every failure a lesson, and across generations those lessons accumulated. Passed down through stories whispered beside the fire, the first universities of humankind, in those small circles of light, beneath endless skies of cold ash, something extraordinary happened. Humans stopped merely surviving the world. They started understanding it. The people who endured, the shadow of Toba, would one day give rise to the genetic lineage of every modern human. Every one of us is a spark from that ancient fire. From near extinction, they gave birth to the future. When the skies finally cleared and the air began to warm, humanity emerged changed, not just physically but psychologically. The memory of that cold darkness, passed through generations, reshaped what it meant to be human. For tens of thousands of years after the Toba catastrophe, our ancestors carried an invisible scar, a kind of evolutionary trauma. They learned that survival depended not on strength, but on connection. To live, they had to cooperate, share, communicate, and create meaning together. That was the birth of something extraordinary. Culture. The same instinct that once drove them to huddle around fires now drove them to gather in villages. The need to remember the disaster gave birth to storytelling, the first myths, spoken under the stars to explain why the world burned and froze. And from those stories grew rituals, symbols, and the beginnings of spirituality. Even the tools they made changed. No longer crude rocks struck in desperation. Now they were shaped with precision and purpose. Microliths, compound weapons, early forms of art, all reflected the mind of a species that had begun to think in systems, to imagine futures instead of merely reacting to the present. And within that imagination was a single, powerful idea. We can rebuild. Every civilization that rose after, from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, from Egypt to China, carried echoes of that lesson, the understanding that life can vanish overnight, and that our only true power is to work together to keep the fire burning. The world after Toba wasn't just a new Earth. It was the birthplace of resilience itself. Tens of thousands of years later, the ashes of Toba are gone, buried beneath layers of earth swallowed by time. But its legacy still burns quietly inside every one of us. Look closely at who we are today. Our curiosity, our creativity, our fear of the dark, and our endless drive to build, to understand, to connect. These are not coincidences. They are the fingerprints of survival, etched deep into our collective DNA. Every invention, from the wheel to the rocket ship, traces back to that ancient instinct, the need to endure, to adapt, to keep the flame alive no matter how cold the world becomes. Even our myths echo it. Stories of floods, Fire and rebirth that appear in civilizations oceans apart. Perhaps they're not myths at all, but memories, carried through countless generations. Whispers of the winter that almost erased us. Toba nearly destroyed humanity, but it also refined it. The eruption acted as nature's cruel filter, not for the strongest, but for the most adaptable, the most cooperative, the most imaginative. Those who could dream beyond the chaos became our ancestors, and in that way the fire never died. It leapt from volcano to torch, from torch to hearth, from hearth to circuit board and city light. It became everything we are, every idea, every connection, every spark of hope. The world has ended before and it will end again. But if the Toba survivors taught us anything, it's this. As long as even one spark remains, humanity will find a way to reignite the world. 74,000 years ago, humanity stood on the edge of extinction. The sky turned to ash, the world froze over, and our entire species, every dream, every heartbeat, was reduced to a handful of survivors clinging to life in the dark. But they didn't give up. They adapted. They learned to find warmth in each other when the earth gave them none. And because of them, we're here, breathing, thinking, building, dreaming. Every city skyline, every song, every story is a continuation of that moment, when a few fragile beings refused to vanish. The supervolcano Toba didn't just change the planet, it shaped the soul of our species. So the next time the world feels overwhelming, when everything seems lost or uncertain, remember, we've been here before. We've survived worse. Inside, you burns the same spark that outlasted the coldest winter in history. Because you are the descendant of survivors, of inventors, of those who found light in absolute darkness.